Welcome everybody to our virtual vinegar class. I'm super happy that everybody could join us tonight. I know that a lot of folks weren't able to come tonight, so we will be recording so that they can enjoy the class at a later date. I would encourage you to ask questions at any point during this evening and event. I think it's a great opportunity to, we've got a small group tonight, so you can unmute yourself and, feel free to ask about any questions that you may have. We are going to be exploring the world of vinegar tonight. And we have a really great lineup. So I'm going to show you what we're kind of the order in which we're starting. So we're going to start with the Sauvignon Blanc late harvest vinegar from Katz. Next up, we are going to do the Cepa Vieja, which is a sherry vinegar. And then last but not least, we are going to do the Aceto San Giacomo, the Saba. And then we are going to finish up, if you got the add-on, with the Ravida Marsala wine vinegar. And as we talk a little bit more about vinegar, you'll kind of understand why I selected these specific vinegars, because they're very representative of traditional styles of vinegar. And I think the very first question is, what is vinegar? Vinegar is essentially a double fermentation. So you have the first fermentation where you take simple sugars and they are converted into ethanol using yeast. So that can be a fruit juice, it can be a wine, it can be apple cider turned into alcohol. And so that's the first level of fermentation. And then the second level of fermentation, as we all know, if you've ever left a bottle of wine on your countertop for too long, that ethanol can get converted into acetic acid with the introduction of acetic acid bacteria. And those can occur naturally in the environment, but they can also, in the world of vinegar, be added so that you can have a more controlled environment. And one thing that I would encourage everyone to do is grab a quick glass of water, and you are going to need a spoon to taste from. We're going to be doing what I call a formal tasting. And so we will be sipping the vinegar directly, and then I will be talking a little bit about the style of the vinegar and how it's made and what makes it unique. And but I'm also going to share a few recipe suggestions for that. And definitely have a glass of water on hand, because we're going to want to cleanse our palate. So I'm going to take 1 second so that everybody can grab their glass of water and a spoon. And I'm actually going to fill up my water real quick. All right, so you have your water, that's going to be your palate cleanser. So we're going to start with the Katz Sauvignon Blanc vinegar.
I'm sorry, before we start, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I was a little turned around from not being into Zoom. My name is Julia, and I am, as of December, the new owner of Formaggio Kitchen. I worked at the Huron location for 16 years, what was meant to be a 3-month job, and fell madly in love with the product, the people, and it just snowballed. And I always told myself, if I ever get bored, I'm going to move on to my, career of public health, which is what I studied. And I never got bored. And I just absolutely love digging deeper into all sorts of different products, not just cheese, but the vinegars, the jams, the honeys, and whatnot. It's just such a fascinating world that I feel like it's limitless what you can learn and discover. So that's it's just absolutely fabulous and fun. And so thank you. I apologize for not introducing myself.
That's okay. I thought that's who you were, but I wasn't sure. But thank you.
Of course, nothing is more humbling than technology difficulties. I will say it's the one thing that will absolutely bring you to your knees. So we're going to start with the cat's vinegar. And the funny thing about the cat's vinegar is that it seems, a lot of people see the label and think that it's a larger production, just because they do a very nice, clean label. But it's actually a very, very small production from California, from Napa Valley. And Albert Katz and I have been working together for many, 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 many years. And he has actually been my gateway to a lot of small producers in the sort of Napa Valley, Berkeley area. And he has introduced me to so many lovely producers. He and his wife actually moved to that area in the late 80s. And in the early 90s, he became one of the founding members of the California Olive Oil Council. And obviously, he grows olives and makes olive oil, but they wanted to also develop a beautiful vinegar that was reminiscent of what they had had and enjoyed while they were in France. And so what they do is a Orléans style of vinegar. So we're going to be talking, the first two vinegars are representative of two very, very traditional styles of vinegar. The first is Orléans, and then the second is the Solera style. So Orléans is originated obviously in France. And what is really interesting about that style is you introduce either a wine, a young wine, or a juice to an already sort of developed wine vinegar. And so what that does is it adds that separate element to it, and it requires additional aging to allow the vinegar to continue to acidify with that new ingredient and develop into a mature, really balanced vinegar. And so this is a late harvest Sauvignon Blanc vinegar. And you'll see on the bottle, it says agrodolce. And in Italian, that means sort of sweet and sour. And so you'll see that with this vinegar. And the reason why they call it that is because they actually leave the grapes on the vine for 4 to 6 weeks after they would traditionally harvest them. If they were going to make a Sauvignon Blanc wine, they would harvest them 4 to 6 weeks earlier than they harvest them to make this vinegar. And so what that does is it almost creates the grapes are almost raisins by this time. And this is a very classic technique for making famous dessert wines like Sauterne. So it concentrates the sugars naturally found in the grape. Excuse me. And they press those grapes when they've got, it doesn't have as much juice, of course, because it's almost been dehydrating, it's aging, it's getting a lot denser. But what you end up with is a high proportion of sugars to juice, and they blend that sweet concentrated juice with their sort of mother vinegar that they have. And they then age them slowly in oak barrels for several years. And so the reason you don't see this style of production frequently is because of the time. And, it does take a long time to allow the flavors to mature. You want to obviously bring out notes from the oak barrels, which sort of have sweet and vanilla-like qualities. So it is something that is time consuming, but worth it. So to have such a beautiful and well-made vinegar accessible to us at a really reasonable price is why I adore this vinegar. Our kitchen uses it. I buy it in food service. Because which is just like a gallon jug, and our head chef Eduardo um has to use it for his summertime gazpacho recipe. He just won't use any other. He uses the red, which is the Zinfandel, for that recipe. Similar qualities, but a red wine vinegar versus a white wine vinegar. So let's taste this. So again, if I were at a food show or with a producer, we would just be sipping out of a little cup and just trying the product straight. If you're tasting olive oil, you sip it straight rather than have it with bread. You want to avoid having any other element that could impact the flavor profile. And you'll see this one is actually really delightful to sip on. It's not as harsh as some of the others because of that agrodolce quality. It has a real intense natural sweetness. And I love this vinegar. This is what I would use in the summertime for salads. Like tonight, I'm actually, after this class, I have a salad ready to go. I basically like to pickle leftover vegetables in vinegar just lightly. So I had made some asparagus the other night. I had some fresh, we're finally getting some, I shouldn't say finally because it's so early, but it feels like summer with the heat, some red spring onions. And you just toss that with the vinegar, let it sit for 10 minutes, and it lightly pickles it, takes away any of the bite from the onion. And, it helps kind of freshen and liven up that asparagus that I cooked last night. And it just hangs out in that vinegar, and then I add oil to that, and then I toss it with the lettuce, and you get this beautiful sort of pickled vegetable quality that's sort of throughout your salad that's absolutely delightful. As you can see, this is a high toned vinegar, but it has that sweetness, so it can be readily used as a salad vinegar. It can be used for deglazing. With cooking. So really, I consider this a very great all-purpose vinegar. I'm going to finish my sip here. And the other important thing to note about this vinegar and the vinegars we're tasting is that they are unpasteurized. And what that means is you have a bacteria, which is the acetic acid bacteria, which is helping with the second fermentation in turning that ethanol into acetic acid. And that bacteria doesn't die unless you heat it. And so it's continually there, it's living, and it does actually have a consistency to it. If you've ever had like a raw apple cider vinegar, you can see what's called the mother, which is it's sort of like a glob of I don't want to say, it's really the best texture to think of as kind of mucusy, which is not super appealing, but when you think about what it is and what it does for the vinegar, it's a lot more appealing and delightful. And so it is continually allowing the vinegar to kind of grow and sort of slightly change over time. And the great thing too is from sort of a health perspective, which again, we're not focused as much on the health perspective tonight, but that bacteria, introducing that to, your gut biome and all of that is always really desirable, so that you can kind of diversify what you've got going on. Does anybody have any questions about that first vinegar before we move on to the Solera method? All right, so next up, and you're going to notice a very pronounced difference, not only in color, but in flavor as we talk about the Cepa Vieja, which is from Jerez, Spain. And so this is a sherry vinegar. And the Solera method, so this vinegar is 25 years old. And a lot of Americans think about old vinegar, so to speak, as being balsamic. And so obviously there are a lot of other balsamics, and Solera vinegar is a great example of how you can get a very, very aged balsamic, or sorry, very aged vinegar that is not necessarily super viscous. Like you can see, this is very liquidy. And it has a much more liquid consistency. And so let's start out with a taste of it, because I do want to highlight the pronounced difference between this and the first one that we tried. And I definitely would recommend don't sip quite as much of this one at once, because it is a stronger vinegar. So I'd love to know what you think. For me, I love the woodsy notes, and it's a lot more savory, and the general sort of wood flavor comes out a lot more. And that makes perfect sense when you think about it, because it is aged for 25 years. So this is made from Palomino grapes, and it's made with a series of barrels called criaderas. And so these barrels are basically set up in a row essentially. And then the oldest barrel is called the Solera. And that's what this method is named after. And so what it is it's a true blending of vinegars, because you're not actually getting a true, like every little particle in here is not 25 years old. Some of it may be 100 years old. And so the fascinating thing is the Solera barrel is the oldest barrel. And so the producers will start to bottle things up from the Solera barrel, but they will never drain it completely. So there will always be vinegar remaining in that barrel. And then vinegar will be transferred from the previous barrel into that that is, one step younger. And so will be added to this older vinegar, blended together, and then that will continue to age. And they do this every single year so that you get this sort of blended vinegar at the end with these rustic wood barrels. And so because they're never fully drained, you're constantly adding, at the very end, this fresh fermented grape must, which grape must is a word I'm going to talk about a lot with the next vinegar that we're tasting. And all it is essentially the juice with the skins and the pulp and the seeds and all of that. And so it is the fermented must that's then pressed and strained, and that is added to that first barrel. And so over time, it moves from barrel to barrel to barrel. And so you get a lot of qualities of every harvest, of each barrel, of all the ages. And so that's kind of why I love the sort of intense woodsy quality of this. This is a vinegar that I would use for marinades. It's a more intense, aggressive vinegar. It's not, you could definitely use it for a salad, but I wouldn't use it on a very light and delicate salad. I would have it, with something like, if you're going to do a salad with shredded duck confit or something like that, this would hold up really nicely. But it has to, it really holds its own, which I absolutely love about it. And I love it when I think about sort of the woodsy quality. The way that I think about pairing things and using things is, well, okay, there are a lot of wines that have a lot of woodsy notes to them. What would I enjoy that wine with? And so that's what I think about how I would enjoy this sherry vinegar as well. So I think it would be fabulous sort of deglazing a pan of meat, like if you're searing up beef or pork, you can deglaze with a little bit of this, and you're just going to get this incredible rich woodsy sauce to pour over whatever you're cooking, whether it's pork, whether it's steak. But I like to think about, you want to match heft with heft. And this is definitely a heftier vinegar than the first one that we tried. Does anybody have any questions about that one? So we've talked about the two very traditional old world styles of making vinegar, Solera and Orleans. And those are the ones that take time. As you can see, this is not something where you make it and it's done in a year and then you put it to market. And so that's what's really special about a lot of these vinegars. And I think that's why it's really great to talk and learn about the different styles. And when you see, that method on the bottle, you're going to say, okay, I know that this has taken time. This has taken years. And there is sort of a sense of quality that comes with that care that goes into that. All right, so if there are no other questions, we're going to go on to our next vinegar, which is the Saba, which is really funny because it's not technically a vinegar. I wanted to include Saba because it is in the vinegar family and it is considered in layman's terms by almost everybody a vinegar, but technically speaking, it is not a vinegar. However, it is so important to the vinegar world that I felt like, and it's for me, this is like the prized thing at Formaggio Kitchen and just of Italy, because it's just like such an unknown secret. I had to add it. And so what Saba is, this is from San Giacomo, and we're very good friends with Andrea, who's the maker of this. And he's a young man who has decided he wants to make vinegar very traditionally again, because there's, as some of you may be aware, there's in Modena, in the sort of balsamic craze of the 90s, there was a lot of fraud and just sort of bad practices happening in Italy where, Americans discovered balsamic vinegar and they wanted it. And so anything and everything was being done to export this vinegar, and not all the practices were great. And over time, there have been sort of classifications to help protect it, but not as much as you might think. And so he wanted to take one step further and go into a very, very traditional style of making vinegar. And so when you make a traditional Modena vinegar, balsamic vinegar, you start with cooked grape must. And so you're using the grapes of the Lambrusco and Trebbiano grapes, and it's actually cooked. So this must, and I talked about must before, it's the pulp, the juices, but really the meat of it is the juice. That's what you're after. And so you're actually cooking it over an open wood fire so that it becomes a third of its original volume. And that is what Saba is. So let's taste that. And you can see just by pouring how thick and viscous it is. And then when you smell it, you get that sort of burnt sugar in a sense, or caramelized sugar, I should say. And you get that intense sweetness. And then when you taste, night and day from what we just tasted, with these obviously not being a true vinegar. This is a product that's meant to be enjoyed young. It's considered a condiment. And the reason that I love it so much is because people often will come in asking for balsamic glaze, which balsamic glaze oftentimes is balsamic that has added sugar and colorant, because the only way to get a true balsamic really, really, really thick and syrupy and sweet is by thyme. And thyme is money, and not to be cliche. And so it's expensive. And so those very, very aged balsamics can tend to be, you're talking 60, 70, 100, $200 up to $300. I think our most expensive balsamic is. And that is because of the time. So how does Saba fit into this equation? When you're making balsamic from Modena, what you do is you cook the grape must, and that's the meat of your balsamic. That's the flavor, that's the heart of the balsamic. And you are adding to it a red wine vinegar. And so when you see balsamic of Modena, look at the ingredients. And the first ingredient should always be cooked grape must, which is this guy. And the second ingredient should always be red wine vinegar. And there's no standardization as for vinegar for balsamico of Modena saying what proportion it should be, what ratio. So you always want to make sure that the cooked grape must is the first ingredient, because that, as I said, is the heart and soul of the balsamico. And it is a much cheaper product, both, taste wise and fiscally, if you add a ton of red wine vinegar and then add a little bit of cooked grape must. And again, a lot of sort of trickery is people will add sugar to that, color and things like that to help it seem like it is more special than it is. And so when folks, ask me for a super aged balsamic or a syrupy balsamic or a balsamic glaze, I totally understand that, sometimes you don't want to use a $100 product freely every day. And so that's where the Saba really plays an incredible role, because it is the heart and soul of the balsamic. You get all those flavor profiles without as much acidity and a lot of concentrated fruit notes. You get a lot of the sweetness. So it can be used in the same way that you would use an aged balsamic. So if you did get the add-on tonight and you got some of the Parmesan, traditionally you would drizzle a little bit of really old vinegar, balsamic vinegar, over your Parmesan and enjoy it. But you can absolutely do the same with the Saba. I think it's absolutely fantastic. You can pour it over mozzarella, burrata. You can use it in a salad if you prefer a sweeter vinegar. One of the things that I think is underrated, but an incredible use for something like this, is vanilla ice cream or strawberries. It's a fabulous dessert option as well. And I think that it has incredible complexity. And it's just a very unique expression of sort of a representation of part of a balsamic and really what makes balsamic special. So it's really nice to have this condiment available to us. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the last one?
Would you refrigerate this?
You actually don't need to refrigerate it. It has enough concentrated sugars that it does not need to be refrigerated, and it's got enough acidity that it won't mold. And so it holds exactly as you would have a vinegar. It's considered more of a fresh product. So whereas vinegar can, you would enjoy 20 years later, 30 years later, this is something that ideally you would enjoy within the year that it was harvested. Of course it will last longer than that. However, you will get the kind of the best flavor profiles if you use it within that first year. And the other thing that I failed to mention before is, as a cooking element, it's a fabulous vinegar to glaze. If you have duck breast and you want to do a glaze, or pork loin or anything like that. And I see someone asked that Saba is good over seltzer, and that is absolutely true. And it's fantastic. And it's a really nice sort of substitute for a soda. It has all of the beautiful, rich flavors that you're tasting, but diffused in a really nice, bubbly drink. And so a lot of bartenders are actually discovering Saba as an ingredient for cocktails and mocktails and things like that. And I think that as I introduce it to people, they get really excited about it. And it's really fun to introduce to a larger group of people because it is such an affordable product, but such a great product. So So someone just asked which vinegar would I recommend to cook the fish in. I would say I would use the Sauvignon Blanc vinegar for fish just because it is a much lighter, more delicate vinegar. And something like that, I'd almost make a mignonette, which would be, like a chopped garlic or shallot, sort of lightly pickled in that vinegar. You can see a theme. That's one of my favorite things to do is lightly pickle vegetables in some sort of acid, whether it's lemon juice or a really nice vinegar, because it's a quick pickle. It takes 10 minutes. So usually I do that first. I set it aside and then I cook the rest of my dinner. By the time I'm done, it's ready. And so if you make that little mignonette, you could even add a little mustard, a little olive oil, and essentially you're making a beautiful vinaigrette to sort of spoon over a white fish or something like that. And it's absolutely amazing. So, does anybody have any other questions? All right, so we talked about two very old world styles of making vinegar, and then we talked about sort of the mystery ingredient of balsamic vinegar, Saba, and why it's so special and unique. And so now, sort of part two, if you did get the add-on, is a balsamic style vinegar, but made with a different grape. So this is the Ravida vinegar from Sicily. Natalia Ravida is the maker. And she's actually going to be coming and doing a class with us this spring. So keep your eyes out. If you're in the Boston area, we're going to be taking over the Commonwealth Wine School space, and she's going to be doing a class with us. She's a fabulous cook, and we've had the pleasure of having her visit us before. And it's just so fun because her ingredients and what she makes in Sicily are incredible. But then when you see how she utilizes them, it's just really inspiring. And so this is, you see the bottle is aceto di vino, which is red wine or wine vinegar, I should say, mosto concentrato di uva. So that is our cooked grape must. So that is our secret ingredient. And so what she is doing is she's taking a very traditional Sicilian grape, the Marsala grape, and making a balsamic style vinegar. So the cooked grape must with the added wine vinegar, also made from the Marsala grape, to create this beautiful, beautiful vinegar. And when you look at the ingredients on the back, it's very, very, very simple. It is wine vinegar and grape must, and that is it. And so you'll see, because the wine vinegar is the first ingredient and the grape must is the second, which when you're looking at a balsamico, you want it to be flipped. You'll notice that this is going to have a bit more acidity and a bit more bite than what you'd expect from a balsamic. So really nice smell. You can get, I love kind of smelling it after smelling the Saba because you do get some similarities with the sort of concentrated fruit notes, but it clearly, my eyes already are sort of watering a little bit because it clearly has a pronounced acidity to it. And this to me is such a lovely balance, compared to the sherry, which I think is a bit more aggressive and more intense. And then the Saba, which is so sweet and just all fruit all the time. This has a nice balance of you do get that concentrated fruit note, but it's not sweet. It's almost how I would describe a lot of the fruit forward wines that are dry, but they have this intense sort of concentrated fruit flavor to them in their core. And that's what I love about this. And that makes it really versatile to use both in cooking elements. I mean, obviously, when I think about Marsala, I think about mushrooms and chicken, and you don't have to stray because if you sauteed up some mushrooms and deglazed the pan with this Marsala wine vinegar, It'd be so, so, so good. So you don't necessarily have to default to wine for deglaze. I love using vinegar to deglaze. I think it adds a beautiful acidity, and it really adds a nice complexity to whatever it is you're cooking. Marsala vinegar obviously Marsala wine has an intense sort of density of flavor anyways, which I think lends itself so nicely to making a vinegar. It's just very uncommon to see a vinegar made with Marsala wine. And I think part of that is because it is such a regionally specific wine. And in Sicily, it's very traditionally, everything is tradition. And so, there's not a ton of strain from sort of the traditional products. So oftentimes if you're growing Marsala grapes, you're making Marsala wine. But this is an absolutely lovely representation of the grape. And I think it's a really fun way to see kind of a balsamic style vinegar using a different grape. And so I hope that you enjoyed it and got a better kind of understanding of, the diversity of this just scratches the surface. Of course, there's so many other vinegars out there to explore: infused vinegars, black vinegar from China. There's beautiful rice wine vinegars. So the sky's the limit. And I was going to say I'm ashamed by the amount of vinegars I have, but I'm not. I should be very proud of the amount of vinegars I have in my pantry, because I do think that they fulfill a really unique purpose and can really enhance more than just a salad. One of my favorite things to do is to roast winter vegetables, and after they've come out of the oven, they're still raging hot, to toss in a little bit of vinegar. And it can be, depending on my mood, it can be anything. It could be this late harvest Sauvignon Blanc. It could be the Saba, the Ravi, like any of them would work depending on kind of what your overall concept is that you're going for. And that's what I love about it, because it's not just sort of cookie cutter, this is what you're going to get. And there is, a lot of bad vinegar out there too, and something to watch out for. But I feel like when you have bad vinegar, it's that acetone note is what you want to avoid, which is nail polish remover essentially. So if you get that note, generally that is a sign of a lower quality vinegar. But again, we use distilled white vinegar all the time in pickling. So, and that's not something that you would ever use, in a salad or something like that. So, vinegars do have their place and their uses. But if you do have any more questions about exploring the world of vinegar, please let me know. You can always email me at just julia@formaggiokitchen.com. And happy to go in depth if there are other vinegars you want to explore. It was hard picking, the selection because there's so many to choose from. La Guinelle is from the south of France, one of my favorite vinegars. I desperately wanted to include that, but we didn't have it in stock when we were doing this. But it's a beautiful vinegar that I recommend that folks try. And let's see, is there a good local vinegar? Absolutely. And so the local vinegar is, we have a gentleman, Rodrigo, who approached me, several years ago and said, "Hey, I'm making vinegar in my basement. I think it's pretty good. Do you guys want to try it?" And we said, "Sure, why not?" We love, people are obsessed with food, and gave it a go. And he brought it in and it was fantastic. And he actually already had worked on packaging, and he had cute little bottles, and he was giving it to friends and family, and kind of, you could tell this was more than a hobby, and he was really kind of launching his brand. But he wanted to talk to us and really get our opinion, because he didn't want to launch before he felt it was ready. And I it really was special because having that relationship with him and us troubleshooting a few of the vinegars with him, but really being overwhelmingly impressed by what he was making. And his company is called American Vinegar Works. And you will see a very large selection on our shelves. And they're great because they're in smaller bottles. And he does everything from like rosé wine to rice wine to malt beer, like porter vinegar. So he really does a diverse um, a diverse selection of vinegars, and those are absolutely fantastic. And then, of course, being in New England, we have a great selection of local apple cider vinegars. Cars is one of my favorites. And those are the two, that I really, really go to for local. And if you did get the add-on as well, you did get that Parmesan cheese. And I highly recommend that you try it. We import this Parmesan. It's aged 2 years. And I recommend that you try it with both the Saba and the Ravida, because that is a very traditional way to enjoy it if you're in Parma. And you would just sort of drizzle a little bit over, and that sort of concentrated, dense flavor from the cheese counterbalances with, in the case of the Saba, a sweeter sort of condiment versus the Ravida, which is a little bit more acidic. More traditional would be something like the Saba, but I think both would be really fun to explore. Does anybody have any other questions? All right. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit about vinegar. Our next class is going to be on olive oil. So we're really going to deep dive and nerd out about olive oil. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. And like I said, we are all available. So Louisa and Meg are part of our online team, and they can answer any questions that you might have if you email orders@formaggiokitchen.com, or if you have any questions about product that are specific, weird, or random, just shoot me an email at julia@formaggiokitchen.com. That is all. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you weren't able to join us tonight, thank you for watching the recording. Without further ado, thank you again. I appreciate everybody taking time to learn a little bit more about food. So thanks again.